Once again, Atmasutakale, Yallavarikum Namaskaram. I am very happy to be here and pay my tribute to the memory of E.K. Madhavan. He was a true son of the soil. And uh, what now sons of the soil throughout India are facing are a new kind of assault. An assault through the agency of wildlife. And human wildlife conflict has become a major problem for people everywhere in the country. I have friends in Himachal who own apple orchards. They say their apple orchards are ruined. I have friends in Maharashtra who are very simple, small peasants whose agriculture is ruined by the wild pig attacks. And in West Bengal, there are farmers who are getting killed by elephants. What is all this meant to achieve? Let me suggest to you a simple analogy. In 1860, when the so-called scientific management of forest was being instituted, there were strong pleas by the tea and coffee estate owners of Nilgiris and Anamalais, Idukki, Wayanad, all these areas, that shifting cultivation must be banned. There were many revenue officials of British revenue officials themselves saying that shifting cultivation provides a very good livelihood for people, and with the long fallow cycles that were prevalent, they do not do any damage to the nature. But the tea coffee estate owners very clearly stated that unless you throw them off the land, then we will not get labor for our tea coffee estates. So you must ban shifting cultivation. So shifting cultivation was banned, and essentially throughout the country, a very large number of people lost their traditional means of livelihood and were converted into ill-paid labor. And on the tea coffee estates, there is plenty of documentation. They were treated just like slaves. I mean, the same Britishers were still owning slaves on their cotton plantations in the United States and on their rubber plantations in Brazil and treating them as slaves. And this was repeated in India. Now, this is what is being attempted, that now throughout the country, the sons of the soil are to be thrown out from their land, alienated from their waters, and then they must become available as cheap labor for the railways and the highways and the construction of housing for the rich and construction of infrastructure such as Willingham Port. For all this, and they should come to work as very ill-paid labor in the rock quarries, in the mines, and for the construction industry. Now, this is something we must realize, and people must react and must take up this cause and do not allow this to happen in today's democratic India, when our constitution has declared that people are the sovereign rulers. May I come to the next slide, please? Next slide, please. So what we are seeing is that throughout the country, there is this conflict. This lady, in a way, it touches my heart because I know the village from which she comes, a goat village in Gadchiroli district. Young people in the same village are my good friends. I have been working with them on their community forest management project. They are doing a very good, sincere job. This lady related to one of them, and I have walked around those forests fearlessly only 2 years ago, but today the things have changed. This lady was actually doing the job of patrolling the community forest resource forest as they are expected to do. And a tiger attacked and killed her. And there is no proper count, as there is never any proper count by forest department or wildlife wing of what is happening. But Pamla, who retired as chief wildlife warden of Madhya Pradesh, a very sensitive forest officer, has this estimate. Over 1,000 people are killed by wild animals every year in India. Less losses of crops and property run into thousands of crores. And people are not free to defend themselves because all of this requires forest department permission. Next slide, please. This is one of my students. He is now a professor of zoology in West Bengal, a university in Bengal. And he has sent me this picture of people he knows, that the farmers working in their own fields were attacked by elephants, and some of them have been killed. And forest guards have assured them they are making efforts to ensure that elephants head to the nearby forest. That's all they will do. And how will they do this? Now, my old student Sukumar, who is perhaps the world's leading Asian elephant expert, has shown that, like all animals, they prefer to feed on what is more nutritious, more readily available, more easily available, and they will feed on the crops, even if there is fodder available in the natural forest, because the crops provide, in less effort, more nutritious food quickly. And now the problem is that with 50 years of protection, animals are very smart and they learn. They now know that there is nothing to fear from these human beings. They just run away from us and at the most beg forest department to protect them, which of course forest department won't. The next slide, please. This is near Pune where I stay. A hyena has attacked a person and attacked another person who came to his rescue. And all that the forest department reports is that that poor hyena was suffering from some disease. So he attacked. The man is to be blamed for being attacked by this hyena. Next slide, please. And monkeys. Now, monkeys have been let loose, and including on the Parliament building and on the Parliament Secretariat, and actually in the bungalows of ministers, and they are snatching ministers' briefcases. And finally, the lawmakers decided they must do something, and they have assigned 5 crore of rupees for taking care of the elephants. And what is the position? The forest department had an elaborate plan to spend these 5 crores. Some very sophisticated, some immunological castration of the monkeys and all that. And they said they will count monkeys. Now, they have been in existence all these years. The Wildlife Institute of India has been in existence for 50 years, I guess. And what have they done? They have never counted any wild animal till now. All they assert is some very, very vague things and throw accusations at people. But now they say, oh, they wanted to start counting monkeys for the first time after whatever 50 years of the coming into being of Wildlife Institute of India and all that. But then Corona came, so they cannot census them. There have been judgments from 2007 that monkeys should be counted, they should be counted. They waited till 2020 and then took the excuse of COVID, saying they can't count them. They have no statistics. They are simply accusing people of being the reason for all this human-animal conflict. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Now, they are backed by the very irrational urban nature conservationists. Indian Institute of Science, where I worked very happily, one of the finest, or possibly the finest, without doubt, the finest scientific institution in India for 35 years. Now, we had established a field research station on the border of the Mudumalai Wildlife Sanctuary, and there had never been any problem till now. But now the tiger numbers are grown to a level they are getting into villages, and 5 people were killed in Masidagudi village. So the chief wildlife warden was forced to order shooting of this man-eating tiger. And urban nature conservationists have gone to Supreme Court. They are very fond of going all the time to Supreme Court, pleading that no, this tiger cannot be killed. He must at best be caught. And you know, there is a history that one translocating one tiger, government has spent 16 crore rupees, and they can barely give any compensation to people, but they can spend 16 crore rupees to put a man-eating tiger in the aeroplane and moving somewhere else. Next slide, please. Now they are talking, government is all the time talking about doing justice to farmers or doubling their farm income. Now, if losses of crop and property by wild animals run into thousands of crores, and this is a rough estimate, possibility is far greater, then how are they going to double? They are at the best halving the farm income over a large part of the country. Next slide, please. So what is the economic rationality? We are talking that, you know, we must follow economic rationality and make decisions which allow us to grow economically. That is our strength. And if that is the case, then what is this spending crores of rupees and wasting huge amounts of money on the forest department, on the wildlife machinery, and in the process destroying large amount of property in the country? And how is this justified when you are talking about we are promoting rational economic growth? Next slide, please. So it is very clear, and this we must understand, and this we must stand up against. This conflict has been precipitated by concentration of unlimited powers in the hands of the anti-people forest department, enjoying strong support of the equally anti-people urban nature conservationists. And this is what people in the countryside have to understand fully and stand up against. Next slide, please. What a little bit about the forest history, forest management history. There are many very good travelogues. The Europeans were very fond of writing travelogues, and their travelogues describe that when they came to India, India was an ocean of trees teeming with wildlife. And just one, next slide, please. Just one specific description. These are the bamboo forests of Kodagu, a description of 1813 by Captain Basil Hall, who was a captain in the East India Company. I found myself in the midst of one of the most curious and magnificent scenes which my eye has ever beheld. Ground extended on all sides smooth, flat, clear of underwood, and from its level surface rose on every hand, as far as I could penetrate, immense clusters of bamboo, varying in diameter at their base from 6 feet to 20 or 30, or even twice that width. Most of the bamboos were thicker than man's thigh at the ground. And this is just one sample. There are hundreds of such descriptions of India's ocean of trees when the British first conquered it. Next slide, please. And this did persist in one area of the country, which of course has become famous for its greenery and a very favorite center for tourists to visit, and that is Goa. And Goa was under the control of Portuguese. The Portuguese tried to do what British did in India, which is take over the forests and destroy the community management, village community management of forests. But Portuguese found that it led to very high loss of agricultural revenue, so they permitted the community control to go on. And even today, although after Goa's independence, the forest department has tried to destroy it, but in very good measure, the so-called Gaukari or community village forest management persists. And that is why Goa was in 1961 and still remains today the green island of India. Next slide, please. And what was happening in the Great Britain? Now, the Indian culture viewed the animals and the nature as part of a community of being of which they themselves were a part. So we have many, in Kerala you have Sarpakavus, there are many systems of worship of nature. The whole Shabarimala mountain was once a huge sacred grove, and it was, man did not consider himself to be apart from nature. But the Midwest religions, Christianity and Islam, they considered humans as something apart from rest of the living world, and nature to be treated as something to be destroyed if necessary for use of man. Now, in Britain, the aristocracy, of course, then came to dominate over the common people also. So a small elite came to dominate the whole country, and there is this movement called enclosure of the commons, where the community managed village lands of the peasants of Britain was taken over by the lords, and the peasants were reduced to utter poverty. The next slide shows that they went beyond this, that till then, of course, as all over the world, the peasants had been hunting the animals for meat, for their own subsistence. But now, suddenly, this term poachers, if you look at the origin of the term poachers, it is a term introduced by the British lords. And they said that if anybody hunts in our controlled land areas, they are poachers and they must be hanged. And a huge number of people were hanged actually. And with this destruction of community control and with this banning over the hunting, the forest and wildlife of Britain essentially was wiped out by 14th century. Now you can see several centuries ago. And there are the famous legend, you might have heard of Robin Hood. Robin Hood was a folk hero because he revolted against this and continued hunting. But anyway, these people, they were suppressed. Next slide, please. So it is these British who now took over India, and they were hungry to drain India's resources. So all village community lands were taken over. What was the weapon of takeover? It was the forest department. So, and this is again, if you look at the forest history, very clear, plenty of evidence. Forest Department was created an agency dedicated to confiscating the resources guarded by peasants and Adivasis under the guise of conservation. And indeed, British revenue officials, there is a long letter by a Madras revenue official on record saying that all this talk about forest department undertaking conservation is rubbish, that what they are doing is confiscation. As I said, this is a term a British revenue official also used himself. Next slide, please. So, what did Forest Department do? They liquidated forests as soon as they took over in 1860. Huge tracts were handed over for European tea and coffee plantations. And you will see in Idukki, Wayanad also, huge tracts went to European tea and coffee planters, essentially free. And to set up British cantonments, large amount of forest was destroyed. Then railway network began to be built, and for sleepers, and initially the railways used wood fuel. So for fuel, enormous destruction of forests took place. And foresters presided over all this. Then there were ships for Navy, wooden ships for British Navy and gun carriages and so on. And what did FD do? To extort bribes and harass common people and supply highly subsidized wood for the industry all the time. Next slide, please. Mahatma Gandhi had a different vision. He talked about a Republic of India becoming a Republic of self-reliant villages and advanced Sarvodaya, development for all. He talked about Antyodaya, putting the Antya, the last first. And this is akin to Buddha, was also much before Gandhi, but Gandhi echoed him in a way. He was talking about Bahujana Hitaya, Bahujana Sukhaya. What we want to in this world to happen is for Bahujana, for the good of the majority and happiness of the majority. So before independence, Gandhi had asked and Congress had endorsed that villagers will be handed back their forests, ending the forest department's confiscatory regime. This is history, well recorded history. Next slide, please. And what happened? Nehru, he set aside completely all these Gandhian ideals and only thought of catching up with the West and launched India on the path of development at all costs. But development at all costs was very straightforwardly met development at the cost of nature and weak and the poor. So dams were temples of modern India, as Nehru called them. They destroyed wilderness and forests on a large scale and displaced a large number of people without proper compensation. This is Koyna Reservoir, one of the most remote areas of Maharashtra Western Ghats. And this is where people displaced as long ago as 1956 are yet to be rehabilitated. We're talking about rehabilitating them. There are refugees from 1956 in Maharashtra and all over the country, no doubt, who have yet to be rehabilitated. And they are all the time being continually blamed for destroying forest. And in fact, forest department is attacking them. Only last month, a lady from a community of these pastoral buffalo keepers in this area, she wrote to me how when their crops were just about to be harvested, the forest department attacked and destroyed all the crops. Next slide, please. And what was done? It was the forest policy of 1952. It completely denied, put aside all that Gandhi had talked about, and it reaffirmed the hegemony of forest department. In Maharashtra, I did an extended study of a paper mill, the West Coast paper mill. you had your own Grasim rayon at Mahur, and this West Coast paper mill was supplied bamboo at 1 rupee 50 ton. I understand Grasim was supplied at 1 rupee per ton, and the market rates that time were 1500 rupee per ton or so. So the basket weavers had to buy at 1500 rupees, the rate which the mill was supplied. And I have actually, there was a very sensitive finance minister of Karnataka, Murarrao Ghorpade, and he was a friend of mine because I was interested in elephants and he was a wildlife photographer. So he asked me to study this paper mills operation. And because he was backing me, I had access to all kind of information in the field and access to the field. We found that the mill had enclosed large forest areas completely illegally, and they were beating up displaced villagers when they entered what was their own forest till that time. And bamboo supplied so cheaply was exhausted through overuse and unregulated use. Mill polluted both air and water with impunity. Kali River was very rich in fish and shellfish, and the pollution by the mill destroyed those fish and shellfish. This is today called crony capitalism. And what is crony capitalism, which today governs the country totally? Crony capitalism is squeeze the nature and squeeze the poor to fatten the rich. And this is the system in prevalence. And as I say, this is the system which is precipitating this human-wildlife conflict also. Next slide, please. So, what has this Wildlife Protection Act achieved? Earlier, they had their control over only limited area of the country, some 23-24% of the country which were declared forest. But with the Wildlife Protection Act, the stranglehold has extended over the entire country. And one of their targets was Chipko activists. You might have heard of the Chipko activists of Alakananda Valley, Himalayas, and they were great protectors of forest, in fact, and I had the privilege of working with them, especially Chandi Prasad Bhatt amongst them anyway. And they were one of the targets of the Forest Department as soon as this Wildlife Protection Act came into play. Who was behind this? It is the urban nature conservationists, and I must say regretfully that it was Salim Ali's leadership which was responsible. Salim Ali was a personal friend of my father's much before I was born, and I got to know him when I was only 14 years old, and he was a wonderful man, full of charm and full of knowledge. So actually I was inspired by him and decided to become the field ecologist I did become. So he was my guru. But I do not believe in Indian tradition that Guru Sakshat Parabrahma. Now if that guru had faults, he had faults. And I must say that he had faults. And his major fault was that he, along with the British tea and coffee planters, considered people of India with great contempt and blamed them for everything. And 1952, the Indian Board for Wildlife was established. Who were the members? Salim Ali, then two planters, one from South India, Morris, and one from Assam, E.P. Ghee, and they dictated the whole wildlife policy of India till 1972, including the Wildlife Protection Act. The Wildlife Protection Act was essentially written by E.P. Ghee through a series of articles in the Journal of Bombay Natural History Society. I was, as I said, my father was very much a bird watcher and interested in natural history. and we had a full set of Bombay Natural History Society journal, which I read with great interest. And in that, EP gives whole series of articles which spelled out wildlife policy in India, wildlife policy which is completely anti-people. And indeed, the whole Bombay Natural History Society, till the British finally left, was dominated by the British merchants, civil and police officers, tea and coffee planters, and even after this, by some of the descendants of these British ICS and IPS officers who stayed on in India. Next slide, please. So, I talked about them. These British tea and coffee planters, many of them were very good naturalists and wrote fascinating accounts of natural history, but uniformly regarded common people of India with contempt and treated them like slaves on their plantation. You might read, there is a novel, Kantapura, by Raja Rao, and another novel, Red Tea, by Daniel. I met personally Daniel. He was a medical officer on tea plantation in Assam, and he said, although it is written as a novel, all the facts that he has talked about are real. And indeed, these planters were treating people as slaves, essentially. Next slide, please. And this you can see in today's Kerala in recent years. Now, two major disasters were the Puthumala disaster of 2019 and the Pettibudi landslide of 2020 in Kerala, and how a large number of people died. They were plantation labor, and they were forced to live in miserable huts in gullies of streams, and people should never have been forced to live there. Next slide, please. So this is just a picture of the labor camp before and after landslide at Pettibudi. And you can see the kind of chawls in which they were living, and they were reduced to rubble, killing large number of people. Next slide, please. So, in the meanwhile, there was a great hunting spree by the British, and the famous hunting, the apogee of this hunting was by, of course, the great British Viceroy, Lord Linlithgow. And he, in the Bharatpur wetland, which I will talk about in a minute, in this Bharatpur wetland, he shot on a single day, can you imagine, 4,273 birds in a single day. There is this whole description of how he had an army of people standing beside him, loading the gun and handing the loaded gun one by one by one. And he's shooting the ducks and the teal and the geese with abandon. And there is a plaque, he was very proud of the fact that he shot in a single day, he massacred 4,273 birds. Next slide, please. And by the way, Salim Ali was very much a great hunter. I know that. He has talked to me about it. As I said, I got to know him when I was 14, and we went on many field trips together from then till he passed away when I was 46 years old, I guess. Anyway, when he was 90. And throughout he talked about how he had enjoyed hunting. Actually, one of his cousins, Faizi, was a classmate of my father's at Cambridge University. And Faizi told me how he and Salim Ali went shooting on the hills around Kihim, where they had their estate in Konkan, and hunted with abandon. And Salim Ali himself told me how he had not only shot a tiger, but afterwards roasted its meat and ate tiger steaks. He said, Madhav, I am one of the few tiger-eating men. There may be man-eating tigers, but I am a tiger-eating man. And anyway, so, and then there were Indian Maharajas who were, of course, great hunters. And actually, the other members of the Indian Board of Wildlife, apart from Salim Ali and the two planters, Morris and EPD, were all Maharajas. There was nobody with any connection with people in the Indian Board of Wildlife in 1952, and afterwards has never been. Next slide, please. So, and we must understand what is hunting. Hunting is part of human heritage. There is no question that humans were originated and uh, evolved as group hunters on the African savannas. And on large scale, humans have been hunting all along. There is nothing to be condemnable to my mind about hunting. Actually, even today, those who have money and leisure, Europeans in particular, they enjoy nothing more than hunting. And they are hunting all over. In the United States also, in Britain also, large-scale hunting goes on. And in India also, till recently, there was hunting. There are the historical records, next slide please, are interesting. There is the Bhimbetka caves on the bank of Narmada. And these are rock shelters with plenty of depictions of life as it was then. And there are depictions of humans hunting with bow and arrow and spears, everything. They were hunting elephants, they were hunting monkeys, they were hunting turtles, they were hunting rats, they were hunting gaur, they were hunting wolves, they were hunting jackal, they were hunting deer and antelope, whatever was available, they were hunting. And this is part of our heritage. I think it is completely wrong to condemn hunting. Next slide, please. And they are, we are a pluralistic country. We have a diversity of cultures and ways of making livelihoods. So these are associated with a variety of food habits and food taboos. Our ancestors, as I said, in Bhimbetka, are depicted as consuming every kind of meat. Today, some groups of or others of Indians eat. Of course, the urban nature conservationists are all eating mutton and fish sitting in their Mumbai luxury bungalows. But there are also people who eat dogs and who eat monkeys and who eat parakeets and fruit bats. And Salim Ali himself told me, parakeets and fruit bats are very tasty. After all, they feed on choicest of fruit. And I have been, and although actually I tasted the rats that Santals captured, as I'm showing this slide, and they tasted pretty good anyway. I have been to Mizoram and to Manipur, where they hunted monkeys and elephants also. Though I must say I did not taste any monkeys or elephants, but they hunt them. They are part of our country. And who are we to condemn them? It is part of our pluralistic culture. So I believe that no group has a right to impose its own food preferences on other citizens of the country. Next slide, please. And Salim Ali, as I said, was himself a great hunter, had been ringing birds at Bharatpur for several years, but he was, although a wonderful student and knowledgeable about birds, he did not really understand broader concepts of ecology. And he did not realize the ecosystem, understand the ecosystem of Bharatpur. After all, if Lord Linlithgow hunted thousands of birds in a single day, and till that time, Bharatpur had continued to be rich in water birds, why would you say that banning hunting would in any way benefit the uh, wetland? But he decided that banning hunting is necessary because of his sheer prejudice. So Mrs. Gandhi greatly respected him and he wrote to her, and Bharatpur was declared a national park. Villagers protested, and as many as 7 died in police firing. And what did we find? That buffalo grazing was actually keeping the water-loving grass, Paspalum distichum, under check. And without grazing, it proliferated, choked the shallow waters, making it a worse habitat for almost all water birds. Now, I know this fact because I was in constant touch with the investigations that the Bombay Natural History Society was doing in Bharatpur, and Dr. V.S. Vijayan, my very good friend, was in charge. So I saw what was going on, but Salim Ali and Vijayan and none of them actually brought this to light. They should have. They wrote this up and submitted it to US Fish and Wildlife Service. But no Indian was informed of it. It was their duty surely to publish this also in an Indian scientific publication, or at least an open scientific publication. Reports to US Fish and Wildlife Service are not open. But they never published anything in any open publication. This, I think, was inexcusable breach of scientific ethics. Next slide, please. And what is happening with the animal populations? As I said, there has been never any proper count of the wildlife numbers anywhere in India except through 2 groups. Through Indian Institute of Science, I started counting elephants for the first time in India, and then my PhD student Sukumar, who has become world's leading elephant expert, has continued, and there is plenty of clear data that elephant populations have increased tremendously. There is a very well-known quotation from Charles Darwin. He said that if you allow even a slow-breeding animal like elephant to continue to breed, then in 750 years, there would be all these 90 billion elephants. So if they stack them back to back, they will reach 1/6 of the way to moon. Anyway, but now with 50 years of strict protection, wildlife numbers have increased enormously. We should not allow these to increase like this because they are now causing all this serious damage, and it is completely irrational. And animals are smart. So now they know that people can never check them. So they have lost all fear, and there are more and more of them, precipitating these wildlife conflicts, which I'm sure Wayanad is also experiencing. Next slide, please. What is this Wildlife Protection Act in terms of the constitutional provisions? In the hands of Forest Department, it is a defective, counterproductive management tool. It entails grave abuse of human rights to life and livelihood and is not constitutionally valid. You read the Indian Penal Code, sections 100 and 103, they sanction voluntary causing of death or any other harm to the wrongdoer being another human being, if an assault by the wrongdoer may reasonably cause the apprehension that death or grievous hurt will be consequence of such assault, and if the offense involves the wrongdoer committing house or property trespass or robbery. Just think of the wild pig in Kerala. They have on occasion killed people also. There are several cases of their killing people. Of course, they regularly trespass on farmers' properties and rob him of his produce. But Wildlife Protection Act says that if you resist them, then you are a criminal. I talked to 2 people who are very good friends of mine. One is a retired Director General of Police in Maharashtra. Another is a retired Chief Justice of Aurangabad High Court in Maharashtra. Both of them have assured me that this is not a constitutionally valid act, that people should challenge it, and it will have to be revoked. After all, in India, all sorts of acts can be revoked. If the Farm Act could have been revoked, then if people come together, then they can certainly get this act, which is unconstitutional, revoked. Next slide, please. And what has it done? As I said, in Alaknanda Valley, Uttarakhand, where I have many good friends working with the CHIPCO, Sundarlal Bahuguda and Chandi Prasad Bhatt, then the Forest Department stranglehold has been used to destroy their traditional community-based management system, the one panchayats, which were established in 1930s, 31, I think. And they were a great strength of source of strength for the communities of that area of Gadwal. And Forest Department used the Wildlife Protection Act to completely destroy those institutions, and people who now were so weakened, they could not resist. And you know, there have been one after the other disasters. One of the most well-known is last year's February disaster, where the landslide in Alaknanda Valley, not only did it kill people, it destroyed many dams and so on. Next slide, please. And what were the roots of all this? The roots of all this are in the Westerners' economic interest in profiting from the rich wildlife of their erstwhile colonies. So around late 60s, 70s, with cameras and photography, nature-based tourism became an attractive possibility. Savannas of East and South Africa, where people can view these animals in game reserves, theirs came into being. But in Africa, in other parts, there are also the game ranches where the Europeans go and hunt the wild animals. So for these East African Masai Mara game reserve, for example, land has been taken over forcibly by displacing the native Masais. Their name is kept, they were the native cattle keepers. But all operations are owned and managed by Europeans. And natives are employed only at best as drivers and waiters. I visited this in 1971 and saw this whole European domination, but it continues to this day. Last year, my good friend Edlabatkar visited and he said exactly the same thing continued. He was not allowed even to stop on the way and buy a trinket from a wayside shop, because then he will speak to the local people who resent all this, and he was kept a jailer essentially by the people who had arranged the tour, which was a German tourist company. And in these game ranches, you can hunt elephants also. A large number are being hunted, and trophies are mounted. And the Americans especially are fond of all these trophies all the time. In Canada, they hunt polar bears. There are trophies of polar bears, stuffed polar bears, decorate the houses of rich Americans. Next slide, please. And what is going on in Britain? Now, the World Wildlife Fund, which is preaching us to stop hunting, ban all hunting in the country. And what are British doing themselves? Well, the Britain is full of these shooting estates owned by the lords, as I was mentioning earlier. And the lords and their guests who pay can shoot. And the statistics is that each day 12,300 wild mammals and birds are killed on these British shooting estates. And mind you, uh, Prince Philip of Britain, who was the driving force behind World Wildlife Fund, has teach us that we must not hunt anything within our country. I mean, this is, and how the gullible Indians have swallowed this is really amazing. Next slide, please. And you have Sarishka, one of these tiger reserves like Masai Mara set up. And in 2005, the Prime Minister set up a tiger task force because tigers had apparently disappeared from Sarishka. Well, the Forest Department was continually giving out numbers saying that there are 20, 22 tigers still present. So before the Tiger Task Force, CBI held in-camera uh, hearings, although we were forced not to record them. The CBI said there is no question. They had checked carcasses of many poached tigers were left stinking, and the rot causing this stinking was going on for many days. There cannot be possibly any doubt that the Forest Department people could not have noticed these rotting carcasses, and definitely they were party to this poaching. But what happened? No forest official was called to book, and all the forest department did is went around on the villages on the border and beating up people, saying that you are the poachers. Next slide, please. So, with all this and this kind of a regime backed by, unfortunately, Salim Ali's Bombay Natural History Society and other urban conservationists, people have come to view environmental protection as stranglehold of forest department. And they reject conservation efforts because of this. And this is what, of course, the crony capitalists want in the country, so that they can loot the nature and they can suppress democracy, suppress people, but people will not protest and demand conservation of environment and other actions, because they are afraid that that will mean further stranglehold of forest department. This is in Kerala, of course, there is this Eco-Fragile Lands Act, and this is a published account of what happened in that area, that without any scientific reason, a lot of areas were declared ecologically fragile. Individual rights were extinguished, leading to the eviction of 8,000 plus farmers from those areas. Gram Sabhas were never consulted, and FD decided to take on the lands without field verifications. All that the corrupt forest officials did was apparently to ask for bribes. And the moment our Western Ghats report was published, made available to the public, they once again started a campaign saying that if the recommendations of this report are accepted, our Western Ghats report, you will be in trouble, so give us bribes once again. Next slide, please. So who gains from common people turning against environmental protection? Those who are exhausting and degrading our country's natural capital to make a fast buck, the polluting industries, the mine and quarry operators, the real estate lobby, the forest-based industry, and netas and babus sharing in their ill-gotten gain. So this is the status now of what is happening in the country in the context of wildlife protection. Next slide, please. And what does it breed? It breeds bandits like Veerappan. You know, he was a famous bandit. He poached 2,000 elephants and some 65,000 kilograms of sandalwood. And actually, I did not mention here, he killed several forest officials also and several police officials. And he continued from 1968 to 2004. Why? Because the local people supported him. And I had a very interesting experience in Erode, one of the towns in that area where Virappan was operating on the fringe. The conservationists wanted to take out a big procession, protest condemning Virappan. And the local people said, "You dare take out this procession, and we will attack and will not allow the procession to go on." Why? Because while the foresters are only harassing them and preventing them from earning a decent living, they were grateful to Virappan, this man who was killing elephants, poaching sandalwood, and killing police and forest officials, because he provided them opportunity to make some decent living and gave them some employment. Next slide, please. So, what should we be doing? We should stop pitting people against nature, because people have very good traditions of taking good care of nature, and they are rising to protect their environment. The Bishnoi community of Rajasthan is a shining example. I had an opportunity to stay with them, understand them, and their villages are a island of greenery with the KGD trees which they protect, and with the protection they give to chinkaras, the antelopes, and the whole wild animals and birds. So, and against, in Goa, as I mentioned, it is the community management that has benefited. But in Goa, state is promoting what? The state is promoting a railway line going through the Molem National Park. Now, it is Forest Department's duty at a minimum to protect the national park. They did not protest. And what did Government of India do? They poured 1,000 crores to develop the railway line to cater to whom? To the coal berths in Vasco da Gama port, owned by the three A's of India, Adani's, Ambani's, and Anil Agarwal of Vedanta. So, state is not playing its proper role of protecting wildlife even in national parks, and it is instead concentrating on harassing people in the name of nature conservation. So we must change this system, must work with people at grassroots to take charge of conservation of biodiversity through giving them positive incentives. Now let me explain what I mean by these. Next slide, please. Positive incentives. In Australia, we have a very nice system. Australian sheepwood. The Australian farmers, they grow sheep on their ranches. These are, of course, large ranches because the Europeans took over huge tracts of land from the natives. So the individual holdings are huge. Anyway, so they shoot kangaroos because they compete with sheep for grazing. So what does government do? They are not making them criminals for shooting kangaroos. The government has a policy that kangaroos must be preserved, at least to a limit, some extent. So they have a reverse auction. They ask the ranch owners, how much will you accept for allowing a certain number of kangaroos to live on your ranch? And then they pay the lowest bidders, in a proper system of bidding. And kangaroos are preserved. And there is a system of verification, public open system, and based on the performance, they are paid. Australia has another system similarly of promoting switch over to organic farming, and based on how much carbon is sequestered in the soil, about the amount of organic matter that is accumulated in the soil, they pay them. So This is what we must have. Let there be uh, local self-which government institutions, they must make bids and be paid for uh, according their conservation services. Bishnois of Rajasthan must be paid handsomely. They are doing very good service. Nagas may decide to hunt and they may not want to stake any claims. Fine. Then you work with Nagas how they may reduce the pressure on wildlife, but not through the kind of punitive system of Wildlife Protection Act. Next slide, please. What is a rational practical approach? The rational practical approach, the best example of rational practical approach is Scandinavian countries, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland. Uh, I have had the privilege because they are very interested in environmental issues. You know, the first conference on World Conference on Environment was held in Stockholm in 1972 in Sweden. So for years I have been invited. I have spent a lot of time with the Swedes and the Norwegians, especially. And their law is what? They say that wildlife is a renewable resource. And of course it is. As I said, wildlife numbers keep on increasing as they have done in our country without any rational check. Uh, so the Scandinavians say that it should be put to wise use. Their meat is part of our culture. It can be sold on the open market. Uh, you get licenses for hunting, and you can hunt wild animals. And then the details of decision making are decentralized through empowerment of local stock stakeholders. So the local self-government institutions, the Gram Sabhas in India, they must decide on exactly what to do. And of course, there is no question of not being allowed to kill wildlife legally in self-defense. You can kill it. So, what is the result? I mean, this is a high fine. So, as I said, I have been to Sweden many times and Norway many times, and I'm not a vegetarian. I enjoy eating meat, and many of my friends they have freezers full of moose meat, but not just moose meat, even fox meat, and they have given me very good moose steaks. They are enjoyable. Venison is very good, and why not? If in the process you have abundant wildlife, and you have countries which are in the world amongst the top in environmental performance, and there is global ranking of happiness where they are at the top in ranking of happiness, and in both environmental performance and happiness, India is at the rock bottom. Norway, Sweden, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, something like that, Switzerland along with them. And India is out of 180, 165, 177, and so on. At rock bottom in both environmental performance and happiness on global scale, with our very strict protection of wildlife and very irrational protection of wildlife. Next slide, please. So, my proposal is, and I believe we should all uh, back this anyway. That is my plea. That if wild animals come out of national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, and reserve forest, people of those local bodies should have the right to either demand payment for tolerating them or cull these animals and use the various body parts as they wish, as the Swedes do. So they may eat the wild pig meat, and actually, I have friends who traditionally have been hunters of wild pig communities, hunting gathering communities, and they talk about the huge byproducts of wild pig, which are market. And actually, In one of the meetings of Karnataka Board for Wildlife, for which I was a member, the director of animal husbandry proposed that wild pigs should be killed, and from their bristles, hairbrushes should be made. And they have a good market, so that will be a very good cottage industry. And when the forest department said, of course, that cannot be done, he was amazed. He said, what the hell do you mean? The wild pigs are proliferating, they are destroying farmers' properties, and you are saying that they cannot be killed and cannot be eaten, and we cannot establish hairbrushes from their bristles and many such byproduct based industry, cottage industry. But anyway, he could not get his view through, of course. And monkeys again, let people protect our sacred animals and then demand payment for conservation services. Or they may cull monkeys. I mean, in Goa, actually, there is a huge demand by the horticulturists to declare monkeys and vermins and shoot them right and left. So, if you shoot the monkeys, why you waste this good resource? If you shoot the monkeys, you hygienically pack their meat. The Chinese happily eat monkeys. And if you have stopped trade to China, which we haven't actually, but there are Chinese in Taiwan or Singapore or elsewhere, and many African countries, people happily eat meat. Actually, it is considered a delicacy. And we can get revenue from selling it to them, or we can export for medical research, or if we wish, we can send it, give this meat as a present to Nagas, who will happily eat it. And problems of all this, the Manipuris and Nagas and the tribals and all these problems of violence and secession, lot of these problems are due to the way they are treated and injustice meted out to them, unfortunately. They would be happy to get presents of hygienically packed monkey meat from Goa. So, and tigers also. Actually, tigers were shot up till 1972. There were plenty of records that the Maharajas had their business of inviting Europeans to come and shoot tigers and made a lot of money by allowing them to shoot tigers on their ranches. And outside also in Pune, actually, people were shooting tigers very close outside Pune. And today now, of course, the panthers are coming and killing people on outskirts of Pune, and we are talking about what a horrible thing. But people with great prestige in Pune, like Lokmanya Tilak, our great political leader, his grandson was a friend of mine, and he was shooting tigers just outside Pune, and then publishing pictures in his newspaper of him standing with his foot on the dead tiger's body. Or you can send them to US. They will buy them at a very good price. Next slide. So, this is what we must do. In our democratic country, the people are the sovereign rulers of the country, and we have many provisions empowering people at grassroots, the 73rd and 74th constitutional amendments, the extension of Panchayat Raj to Scheduled Areas Act in the tribal areas, protection of plant varieties and farmers' rights act, the Biological Diversity Act, Forest Right Act. All they have provided sound framework for decentralized government, but this is not being allowed to be operationalized, and it is the people who will protect if they are given proper incentives and have very good traditions of conservation. And if they are allowed to play their rightful role, certainly we will move ahead in a proper direction. Next slide, please. So, how should biodiversity be managed? This is my proposal. The Biodiversity Act provides for uh, management through biodiversity management committees at the Gram Panchayat or town, local self-government level throughout the country. And actually, the Act says they should be, body should be constituted by democratically by the local citizens themselves. Today, Forest Department is forcing the forest guard or the Gram Sevak as secretary on these committees, which people resent, and they do not allow this system to operate, and there is enormous actually improper uh, sabotage of the whole system. But if we go by the original proper act, we can have these biodiversity management committees. Their members can make up a constituency and in turn select members at the district level biodiversity management authority, and from there to state level authority and national biodiversity authority. So it is this democratic system which actually both our constitution and our Biological Diversity Act in its original form promotes, that can provide a rational pro-people mechanism for management of biodiversity, including animals currently listed under wildlife schedule. Next slide, please. Who can do it? I believe that youth can now do it. It may take a little bit of time, but now they are empowered with their smartphones. Essentially, all, as far as I know, at least every village in Maharashtra, and certainly I'm sure in Kerala, all along Western Ghats, which are a fairly highly educated population at a minimum, has smartphones in every village. Now with the corona and the online classes, they have become even more prevalent and they are getting cheaper and cheaper. So everybody has access to smartphones. Now the smartphones have cameras and apps. For example, now with one of the Google apps, the photo and lens, you know instantly the scientific names of any species. So the objection that local people cannot prepare people's biodiversity registers because they only know the names of the local, whatever the Gondi names are, names prevalent in Malayalam or the local tribal dialect, that is now gone. I know Gonds who know only Gondi names, yes, but with this app, they are getting the proper scientific names. And there is now a very good mechanism of translation of English through Google Translator. And I don't know, unfortunately, though I would like to know Malayalam, but I have tried writing in Hindi and translating it in Malayalam, and my Malayalam speaking friends have told me that this is perfect. And then they respond in Malayalam and translate it in Hindi, and I fully understand it. So this language barrier is going out, and English is no longer important. Now there are all these possibilities of social networks through WhatsApp groups, or now like today's Google Meet or Zoom meetings. You can connect with people all over. So it is these youth with now slowly develop these network and liquidate the system, which is wrongfully blaming them for destruction of nature. And they should demand that polluters pay real prices of polluting the environment. I took, well, you know the story of the Grasim Bawur pollution and horrible pollution which was imposed on people by the industry, claiming that they cannot afford economically to control pollution. And they have been getting richer and richer. I think Birla's owned it, and there is no question that they have become, as with time, richer and richer, as people at the grassroots have suffered more and more. So we must stop them. The polluters must pay the real prices of polluting the environment and stop being provided countries' natural resources and huge subsidies. All the rock quarries, for example, are a horrible example in a way of how the natural resources are going to illegal owners, not just at huge subsidies, but simply free. Now, this should not continue. So, economic prosperity has to be shared, and all Indians must come to enjoy living in clean, biodiversity rich environments. I believe that the modern technology is making this more and more possible, and we will move towards this. Next slide, please. Let me end by quoting Dalai Lama, man I greatly respect. He says, caring for nature must go hand in hand with respect for fellow human beings. You cannot say, as urban nature conservation is due, that we hold the common people in contempt, we have no respect for them, and we care for nature. That is sheer hypocrisy. As Dalai Lama said, since I deeply believe that human beings are of a gentle nature, this is actually dubious, but anyway, that is what the Buddhist philosophy says. So I think the human attitude towards environment should also be gentle. Not only should we keep our relationship with our other fellow beings gentle and non-violent, but we must extend that attitude to natural environment also. And I think we can and we should move in that direction, and we will move in that direction if our people will actually actualize the constitutional provision. The Constitution starts with, in fact, this pronouncement that people are the sovereign rulers of the country. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to be with you and to share my ideas, share my experiences. And I hope that you will be amongst the people who will perhaps, hopefully, accept these and take this forward. Thank you once again. If you like, I am, of course, quite open to spend whatever more time you wish in the questions or answers, but I leave it to you. Thank you so much again.
Good evening, all. Thank you, Professor Gadgil, first of all, for your magnanimity in agreeing to reschedule and join us again, and also for giving such an in-depth, honest, wonderful presentation. We are all deeply indebted to you, and thank you so much. So we will have the question and answer section at the end. Thank you so much.